The amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise in support of Labor's position on this bill. I represent a community of hard-working people. Traditionally, we've been the tradies, the labourers, the administrators and the retail staffers. And we now live in a time where those jobs are changing. And those jobs change. As those jobs change, so too does the way in which we educate, and especially for people in my community. It's 1 year ago today since I got to stand here and address the federal parliament with my first speech. One of the things that led me here was a comment once made by Liberal predecessor for Lindsay, former MP Jackie Kelly, when she famously declared Western Sydney did not need a university because we were in Pram City. So outraged was I at her comments as a 20-year-old, I wrote a letter to my local newspaper about my disgust for such comments. And I'm pretty sure this was my first interaction on my political activism journey. The future of work is changing, the jobs are changing and our workforce needs to change. And I'm so glad that Kelly's comments were not heeded and instead we have Western Sydney Uni right in my backyard. A university whose alumni I belong to, in fact, along with my mum, who was the first in her family to study and has studied as a mature single mum of 2 kids. This provided me with a great desire to go on to university and I followed there a few years later. This story isn't a unique story across my community. 60% of the students who attend Western Sydney are the first in their families to attend university, and that is a staggeringly high figure. 20% of the students are considered low socioeconomic status, and 37% of those students speak a language other than English at home. These statistics indicate the transition my community faces from the traditional jobs we have had and the ones we will need to be prepared for in the future. The changes that this government seek to make in this bill will diabolically affect my community and my university. In fact, the cuts this lousy bloke who calls himself the Prime Minister wants to make are the second highest in this country. Western Sydney will lose more than $98 million in funding over the next 4 years. Deputy Speaker, $98 million from one university in 4 years. This is the highest amount of money being taken out of any university in New South Wales. Western Sydney University has been at the forefront for 25 years addressing the educational inequity facing our community. Tertiary qualifications for under 34-year-olds is 16.5% in Western Sydney, while Greater Sydney enjoys a level of almost 25% in the same age bracket. These figures are important, and they help businesses to decide where to locate, to know if the population will be able to support their company with adequately qualified and trained staff. So why on earth would Turnbull support anything that jeopardises the access to university for anybody in Western Sydney? Does he think so little of the people that I represent in Western Sydney that he would callously allow these cuts to take place? Does he think so little of our community and that we are all just a bunch of high-vis vest-wearing workers that we're not capable of university study level? And you only need to look at the actions of him. He skulks into Western Sydney. I know, right? I'm even surprised he knew the way. He didn't come by public transport, though, to give his press conference, which is a shame after his famous electioneering train rides not so long ago, because if he did, he might have learnt that where he was headed to there is actually no train. He went to Erskine Park, he got out there and he quoted to the press that he promises plenty of jobs for locals, that we should all live 30 minutes from home to get to work, to education and to recreational facilities. I mean really, 30 minutes. Did he drive from Erskine Park 30 minutes in any direction? He might have tried, but I can guarantee he wouldn't have gotten very far. Now, this announcement he made was at TNT, a freight and logistics depot. We know, on average, one of those warehouses has 5 jobs for every hectare of land like this warehouse takes up. And again, it exemplifies my point that the Prime Minister thinks Western Sydney is a community of high-vis vest-wearing jobs. I have no argument or no issue with people working in those fields whatsoever. But back to his 30-minute catch cry, city, and being within 30 minutes of educational opportunities. How is that going for the Prime Minister when they just cut $23 million from Lindsay's schools and now they want to come after our university for $98 million, and apprenticeships have dropped 37% in my area? If you gut Western Sydney Uni and it has to continue cutting programs and services, where is our next university within 30 minutes, I ask you, Deputy Speaker? I know it sounds old-fashioned, but someone needs to hand this bloke a map. Across Western Sydney we have campuses located in the south, the north and in the west. And I say to the Prime Minister that enough is enough. End the war on Western Sydney. Stop treating my community like we don't matter and start valuing the contributions that come from an educated workforce that Western Sydney can and will happily provide. Fundamental to making Western Sydney strong is supporting its university and addressing the gaps our area suffers from. The measures announced in this bill do nothing to support this. The cuts this government proposes for Western Sydney Uni will hurt the students out there already doing it tough. The cuts mean funding for critical outreach programs that support coming into university from various pathways will go. The cuts put the handbrake on the school engagement program, encouraging young students to get into higher education, and the cuts mean that industry-led partner programs will be gone. Obviously, this Turnbull government believes that educational equity gaps should remain. And disturbingly, these cuts affect jobs, job creation and the critical support required for start-ups and for ideas. Western Sydney University supports 150 Sydney startups and small to medium enterprises through its Launchpad incubator. Some I have been lucky enough to meet, like Stephen Brink from 3D Brink, a very successful startup that was designing and building 3D printers in his Warrington garage. He had the opportunity to move into the Launchpad and has grown his business and now has the opportunity to give back and collaborates with students. Why would the Prime Minister want to see this facility cut? After he famously visited there and referred to as essential, would now be cut to the bone and unable to have the capacity to support the startups and small businesses in Western Sydney. And on top of these cuts, this Turnbull government will put an end to Western Sydney Uni's ability to partner with industry and government in proven job creation programs. Just one example of this co-investment that the university undertook with the former Labor federal government was the $30 million investment in the Warrington Business Park. This investment saw 400 high-value jobs come into Penrith that forges vital links between industry, researchers and students. Great opportunities were delivered to people in my community. But now all we see is Mr Turnbull's opportunities. Well, I have news for him. We don't need your opportunities. We have had to look after ourselves because you cannot be trusted. People in Western Sydney have created their own opportunities and they know Labor will support them. Labor will support their jobs, support their pay and conditions and will support investment in the services they need, like universities. But those opposite only see a life of privilege and not one of opportunities being shared. Opportunities come from investment, not trickle-down tax breaks afforded to big businesses. All these tax breaks to ensure big businesses and millionaires can enjoy the cosy spoils. The government has decided to destroy any opportunity to both students and to institutions, especially in Western Sydney. And for the people in my community, it is absolute proof that we have a federal government devoid of any heart. It isn't a cliche. The Turnbull government is hell-bent on handing out degrees in hard knocks. Imagine for a moment we were instead here, close your eyes, discussing the investment of $65 billion in our education system, not $65 billion in tax breaks to big business. Just let that sink in. Let's have a discussion about that. Imagine how that would trickle down through our nation. Imagine that investment trickling down through every single student across Western Sydney. I would love and I would absolutely welcome to have that discussion, but we are not. The Turnbull government has decided we should not be the clever country anymore and has decided to dumb us down in the most horrible of ways. This government is creating chaos in my community. We need apprenticeships, we need jobs that keep our graduates in the area where they live, and we need to invest in our education system, not take money from it. They have gutted funding at all levels of education. You name it, it's on the chopping block. The Turnbull government has already ripped off public education and cut $17 billion from schools, $23 million of which came from my electorate alone. Now he wants to deliver more cuts and raid the pockets of students with nearly $4 billion of cuts to universities. Higher fees on students, bigger debts for students that they will have to repay much sooner. And what does all of this add up to? It adds up to a compromise on teaching, learning and research. But more importantly, it adds up to dumbing down and the taking away of opportunities. The Turnbull government wants the students of Australia to fix their own broken budget promises. And how are students going to fix it? They're going to start paying back their student loans at not $54,000 but $42,000. And for good measure, they're going to ensure your student fees are higher and universities are restricted in investing in infrastructure that the Turnbull government steals surpluses that were for future building. What great opportunities and lessons this government are providing to students. Members opposite are providing some genuine life lessons right up front. Well, I'm voting to keep Australia clever. even though we have a ridiculously stupid government. And the experts out there know, and they agree with me too. Again, we see a bunch of ill-informed MPs coming in here, trampling over decades and decades of research and ignoring it in favour of cuts instead. Take the innovative research universities, who said the Australian government investment in universities is low by international standards, while our students are already paying some of the highest fees in the world for public university education. Universities Australia said students and graduates will be carrying higher levels of debt into an increasingly uncertain future. And the Group of 8 have said that we have reached a tipping point. And I quote, "It remains the fact that we will receive less than half of our university funding from the government, and this has forced us to be heavily reliant on alternative sources of income to fund the nation-building research that we must undertake." At a time when we need investment into the jobs of the future and to be competitive in a global jobs market, we find the Turnbull government throwing lead into the saddles of students who, quite frankly, were already finding it tough to survive already. Meanwhile, across the road, across the seas in Asia, right on our doorstep, they're investing in universities. That's right, I know. It seems a bit of an anomaly compared to what this parliament wants to do. Their government is investing in universities. This was highlighted last week by Universities Australia, who said, "Smart nations understand that public funding in universities is an investment, Deputy Speaker, in long-term national prosperity. It's clear that China is becoming an increasingly strong competitor, which rankings analysts attribute to the high and sustained levels of state funding. Indeed, China is building the equivalent of almost one university every single week." And that should be a reflection to those opposite about what we're doing to universities in this country right now. What a morally bankrupt government we have when it comes to education. I'm waiting to hear them all fall over themselves and come in here and support these cuts. Well, the government are pretty lousy, because all they could muster up was less than half a dozen government members willing to come in here and spruik their cuts to higher education. And I don't blame them, because it is a drastically, diabolically terrible decision. Western Sydney University is a success story. Why is the Turnbull government stripping it back to its bare bones, leaving Western Sydney with the crumbs yet again? He keeps coming up with three-word slogans like an ideas boom. Well, Prime Minister, it is hard to have an ideas boom when you keep having brain explosions like this one. Can you imagine Mr Turnbull sitting on his balcony at Point Piper, penning his little quips, the glare of the sun in his eyes and the rays beam up from the harbour and all of those yachts? Perhaps Mr Turnbull might like to sit in Western Sydney's peak hour traffic on the M4 and see if you can get to Erskine Park to Penrith in 30 minutes. I can guarantee you can't. Western Sydney University is important because educational inequity is a real and happening issue right now. A $65 billion tax break to big business with no evidence of payback to the community isn't innovation. Tax handouts to wealthy businesses on the backs of every single student cohort across this country is nothing more than trickle-down idiocy. No jobs, no investment, just dividends to the big end of town. And if you are in Western Sydney and want to get ahead, this government is happy to stand on you, to put you down and confine you to a high-vis vest and tell you that you do not deserve the same access and same equity of access to anything. To anything, Deputy Speaker. We have no equity of access to education, to transport, to jobs. And, Deputy Speaker, I am happy to come in here day after day and remind this government of how poor they are treating Western Sydney, and when the next election campaign comes along, that Mr Abbott or Mr Turnbull or whoever is the Prime Minister potentially come into my electorate and sit in my football stadium and say no cuts to health, no cuts to education, no cuts to pensions, no cuts to the ABC, and tell this country that they have a unity ticket on education when the people that I represent are the most dudded by this awful, awful government. Thank you.